In the quiet coastal towns of southern Mississippi, a high-profile death investigation has reached a baffling, unprecedented deadlock. On one side of the ledger, federal prosecutors have acted with stunning speed, deploying law enforcement assets across 3 different states to arrest and charge individuals for making violent threats over the internet. A man in California, a man in Illinois, and a woman in Ohio are all locked in federal custody, facing severe criminal charges connected to this single case. Yet, on the other side of the ledger, the primary folder remains blank. More than a month after an 18-year-old college athlete was found dead in the waters off an isolated barrier island, local authorities have made 0 arrests, named 0 suspects, and refused to release the official cause of death to the public. The paradox is as stark as it is troubling. The justice system has successfully captured the people talking about the tragedy from thousands of miles away, but it has yet to explain what happened to the young man at the center of it all. This is the mystery of Nolan Wells, an investigation where the noise of the outside world has completely overshadowed the quiet, desperate search for the truth. Before we untangle the web of sealed records, digital anomalies, and federal court cases, take a brief moment to subscribe to Brian Case Records and turn on your notifications. By staying with us until the end of this video, you ensure that complex, deeply researched investigations like this one continue to receive the independent focus they deserve. To understand the intense friction surrounding this case, one must first understand who Nolan Wells was. At 18 years old, Nolan was a young man standing on the absolute precipice of his future. A resident of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, he was highly regarded in his community as an exceptional student and an elite college football player. Those who knew him described a powerful, disciplined athlete, a young man who possessed immense physical strength and was known by his family to be an incredibly strong, confident swimmer. He was not a reckless teenager unfamiliar with the water. He was a person whose physical conditioning was a core part of his identity. The geography of the Mississippi Gulf Coast plays a vital role in how this tragedy unfolded. On the 4th of July, 2026, Nolan joined a large group of friends for a holiday outing. Their destination was Horn Island. Horn Island is a long, narrow strip of land, sitting roughly 12 miles off the mainland coast. It is a part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, a place completely untamed by modern development. There are no houses here, no public restrooms, no shelters, and absolutely no permanent human inhabitants. It is accessible only by boat, a destination where visitors flock to enjoy the pristine white sands before returning inland before nightfall. But beneath the picturesque exterior of Horn Island lies a treacherous aquatic environment. Local maritime experts and county officials know that the channels surrounding the island are plagued by notoriously rough, unpredictable currents. Over the years, the regional coroner's office has recovered numerous drowning victims from these exact waters. It is a place where a pleasant afternoon can transition into a survival situation in a matter of minutes if a swimmer is caught unawares. On this particular holiday weekend, multiple boats carried Nolan and his peers out to the island to celebrate. According to witness accounts later gathered by investigators, the atmosphere on the beach was filled with hundreds of holiday revelers. It was a vibrant, chaotic summer scene, but as the afternoon began to fade, the logistics of returning home became complicated. According to public statements later posted by local officials, Nolan Wells was documented alive on the island at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon on July 4th. He was photographed on a boat with friends, smiling, surrounded by the typical trappings of a summer celebration. What happened after that photograph was taken remains one of the most heavily scrutinized timelines in recent Mississippi history. As the large group prepared to load back onto the boats to head back to the mainland, a division occurred. Another black teenager who was part of the broader excursion later stated to reporters that he was originally supposed to ride back on the exact same boat as Nolan. However, as the vessel filled up to capacity, plans shifted. Nolan ultimately remained with a smaller, specific group of 3 white friends, Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, and Morgan Seymour. When the boats finally docked back on the mainland later that evening, Nolan Wells was not on board any of them. He had completely vanished. In the immediate aftermath, a highly controversial timeline gap began to form. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who was later retained by Nolan's grieving parents, publicly alleged that there was a staggering 13-hour delay between the time Nolan went missing on the island and the time an official distress call was formally placed to emergency services. This 13-hour window is the precise point where the narrative fractures. Some of the teenagers who were present on the trip later claimed to investigators that they believed Nolan had intentionally chosen to stay behind on the uninhabited island to speak with a girl. They operated under the assumption that he would secure a ride back to the mainland with another group of boaters later in the evening. But as night fell over the Gulf of Mexico, Nolan's family realized that their son had not returned home. The silence from his phone was deafening. On July 6, 2026, 2 days after he was last seen alive, the frantic search for Nolan Wells came to a devastating end. Search and rescue teams navigating the waters near Horn Island spotted a body floating in the Gulf. It was Nolan. The discovery immediately sent shockwaves through Ocean Springs, but it was the initial public response from local law enforcement that set off a powder keg of community distrust. Very shortly after the body was pulled from the water, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter released a public statement announcing that no immediate foul play was suspected in the teenager's death. To a grieving family, and to a community highly sensitive to the historical context of justice along the Mississippi coast, this rapid conclusion felt entirely premature. Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wansley, and his father, Elmore Wansley, openly refused to accept the narrative that their athletic, swim-trained son had simply suffered a routine accidental drowning. Jackson County Coroner, Bruce Lind, Jr., attempted to clarify the situation, stating that his office's initial physical examination of Nolan's body showed no immediate, obvious outward signs of severe physical trauma. However, because the circumstances surrounding how he entered the water remained entirely opaque, the coroner recognized that a standard visual check was insufficient. The local authorities officially requested a comprehensive forensic review from the state medical examiner's office in order to definitively rule out foul play or hidden internal trauma. As the days clicked by without updates, the informational vacuum began to fill with intense public speculation. Recognizing that the relationship between local law enforcement and the family had broken down, the Wells family took a definitive step. They retained independent legal counsel and commissioned a private, independent autopsy to ensure that no piece of forensic evidence would be overlooked or swept under the rug. As the physical evidence remained locked away in medical laboratories, the battleground of the investigation shifted entirely into the digital realm. Legal analysts and digital forensics experts raised immediate questions regarding how the early stages of the police investigation were managed. Specifically, analysts publicly questioned why local law enforcement did not immediately utilize emergency digital preservation requests in the critical hours after Nolan's body was recovered. These specialized legal orders can instantly freeze a person's digital footprint, preventing cellular companies and social media platforms from deleting metadata, location pings, and message history. The family's legal team soon dropped a series of bombshell allegations regarding Nolan's communications. They claimed that Nolan's actual physical cell phone had vanished and could not be located. Even more disturbing were unverified claims from family allies that certain social media accounts and text messages belonging to the deceased teenager had been systematically accessed and deleted after his body had already washed ashore. The internet quickly seized upon these digital gaps. Unverified audio clips began circulating heavily on platforms like TikTok, with true crime accounts claiming that a faint beach altercation could be heard in the background of a video recorded on Horn Island on the 4th of July. Other internet commentators spread rumors that Nolan had received a chilling final text message reading, "Blood, so much blood," before he disappeared. Law enforcement authorities remained completely silent regarding these viral digital rumors, neither confirming nor denying their authenticity. But the complete lack of a clear, transparent narrative from the sheriff's office allowed these digital theories to morph into absolute certainties in the minds of the public, creating an incredibly volatile environment for everyone involved in the trip. What do you think is the most critical piece of digital evidence investigators need to uncover? Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and remember to mention Brian Case Records so we can keep this important conversation focused on the documented facts of the case. By late July 2026, the investigation into Nolan Wells' death had attracted national media attention, prompting his family to utilize major national platforms to demand transparency. On July 22nd, Nolan's parents and attorney Ben Crump stood before a crowded room at the NAC National Convention in Chicago to announce the preliminary findings of their independent autopsy. The private forensic pathologist hired by the family delivered a finding that offered no comfort, but completely validated the family's skepticism. The independent autopsy officially listed Nolan Wells' cause of death as undetermined. The pathologist noted that the physical evidence left behind on the body simply did not provide a definitive medical signature of accidental drowning, nor did it provide definitive proof of a homicidal assault. It was a medical stalemate. To add fuel to the fire, vocal community advocates publicly alleged that when the state medical examiner originally sent Nolan's body to the independent pathologist, the throat tissue had been conspicuously missing from the transferred materials, an allegation that deeply intensified the family's distrust of the state's handling of the case. Just over a week later, on July 31, 2026, the state of Mississippi counter-announced that its official state autopsy, including the highly anticipated comprehensive toxicology panels, was finally complete. Yet, rather than resolving the public's questions, this announcement introduced a brand new layer of legal secrecy. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath immediately announced that the results of the official state autopsy would remain entirely sealed from the public. The prosecutor defended this decision by stating that the restriction was a standard legal measure designed to protect the absolute integrity of an active, ongoing investigation. The sealed autopsy findings, along with all physical and digital evidence collected by the Sheriff's Department, were being funneled directly toward an upcoming Jackson County grand jury review. Until that grand jury panel evaluates the evidence to determine if criminal wrongdoing occurred, the public is legally barred from knowing what the state found inside the body of Nolan Wells. While the local investigation into the death itself crawled forward under a shroud of grand jury secrecy, the federal government suddenly stepped in to address the explosion of online fury. The complete lack of concrete answers from local officials had caused public speculation to curdle into intense animosity. Strangers across the United States began taking sides, targeting individuals in Mississippi with terrifying digital campaigns. In early August 2026, federal authorities announced the arrest of 3 individuals located thousands of miles away from the Gulf Coast. In California, FBI agents arrested Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarce after he allegedly sent a violent message to a Jackson County Chancery Court judge via Facebook, threatening that a bomb would be mailed directly to the judge's courthouse office. The judge, Ashley Cole, had publicly stated that her son had briefly seen Nolan on the island at 3 p.m. before returning home with a separate group, and that her family had cooperated fully with law enforcement. Despite having no role in Nolan's disappearance, the judge was forced to deactivate her social media platforms out of extreme fear for her children's safety. In a separate federal action, Edward James Porter was arrested in Illinois, accused of transmitting explicit death threats to kill a witness connected to the case and their family. In Ohio, Michelle Francine Edwards was arrested after allegedly placing 21 frantic phone calls to a Mississippi County clerk's office, warning employees that the clock is ticking and making explicit bomb threats against government buildings. When federal investigators processed these 3 individuals, they discovered a bizarre and alarming reality. None of the 3 suspects knew Nolan Wells, none of them knew his family, and none of them had ever even stepped foot in Mississippi. They were entirely disconnected internet observers who had become so radicalized by unverified true crime threads and social media speculation that they crossed the line into felony federal terrorism charges. The wave of public hostility did not just target local government officials. It heavily focused on the 3 young white men who were last seen on the boat with Nolan Wells: Warren Hudson, Jax Patalo, and Morgan Seymour. For over a month, These 3 teenagers and their families endured a barrage of credible physical threats, in-person harassment, and relentless online condemnation, naming them as murderers. On August 9, 2026, the defense attorneys representing the 3 teenagers launched a massive, coordinated legal counteroffensive. The attorneys physically traveled out to Horn Island alongside independent investigators to meticulously document the terrain and review the timeline of July 4th. Upon their return, they issued a fiery, definitive joint statement to the mainstream media. The defense lawyers declared that Warren, Jax, and Morgan were completely, unequivocally innocent of any involvement whatsoever in Nolan's death. They stated that the 3 boys considered Nolan their best friend, loved him like a biological brother, and were just as heartbroken by the tragedy as anyone else in the community. The legal teams announced that they had compiled a comprehensive file of verified evidence and witness interviews, which they had fully turned over to law enforcement authorities. Furthermore, the attorneys announced the creation of a specialized legal defense fund on Give Send Go, explicitly designed to fund a wave of aggressive civil litigation. They warned that they were actively combing through all mainstream media broadcasts and social media platforms to isolate every single defamatory, libelous, or slanderous remark made against the 3 teenagers. The defense team made their intentions perfectly clear. Anyone who continued to traffic in unverified online lies or accused the boys of criminal acts without proof would be tracked down and sued to the maximum extent of civil law. Today, the Nolan Wells file represents a deeply polarized community and a family frozen in grief. The underlying tragedy has been layered with complex social tension, drawing painful parallels to historical racial violence in Mississippi and driving a deep wedge of distrust between civil rights advocates and local county police. Nolan's father, Elmore Wansley, has pleaded publicly for a reprieve from the noise, stating that a grieving parent cannot properly process the loss of a child while simultaneously defending their family's jobs, character, and safety from a barrage of vitriol from total strangers. As the public awaits the upcoming grand jury review, the core questions of this case remain entirely unanswered. We still do not know what the state's completed autopsy reveals about the physical state of Nolan's body. We still do not know the exact chronological events that took place during the 13-hour gap between the boat's departure and the emergency notifications. We still do not know the location of Nolan's missing cell phone, or whether his digital accounts were truly altered after his passing. The facts create the tension in this investigation, and the facts tell us that while 3 people sit in federal prison cells for talking about the case, the actual story of what happened on that lonely stretch of Horn Island remains locked inside a sealed courthouse vault. Nolan Wells was not a true crime plot point, an internet theory, or a tool for digital warfare. He was an 18-year-old athlete, a son, a teammate, and a friend whose life ended far too soon, leaving behind a family who simply wants to know how their son went out on a holiday boat trip and never came home. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the documented facts. If you want to stay informed as this investigation heads to the grand jury, please hit the like button, subscribe to Brian Case Records, and turn on your notifications. We will continue to follow every future update, court filing, and official development in the pursuit of the verified truth.